The Shift Network presents Reversing Your Criminal Conviction with Elizabeth Franklin Best. Let's talk about it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Vicki Bone, your host of Let's Talk About It. And we are so excited to have with us today attorney Elizabeth Franklin Best, the author of Reversing Your Criminal Conviction. Before we get started, if you are joining us on the Shift 99 via live streaming television, prepare to receive a wealth of information. You may want to contact everyone you know and tell them to join us live on the Shift 99 live streaming, because the information you will hear will be extremely edifying. Now, to introduce the remainder of our panel, my co-host, Anala Diors, the Woman Woke Within chairperson, will join us today, along with Michelle Jones, who's the vice chair. Members of Women Woke Within are Joanne Cash Owens, Director of Nonprofit Affiliations, Katrina Butler, Director of Contributory Coalition Affairs, and our newest member, Jenny DeMott, Director of Communications and Public Information. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Before we get started, let's learn more about our guest speaker, attorney Franklin Best. Leading criminal defense attorney Elizabeth Franklin Best is the owner of Elizabeth Franklin Best PC, a boutique law firm. The firm is committed to delivering the highest level of professionalism and aggressive advocacy in criminal appeals and federal criminal defense. Attorney Franklin Best's extensive work is evidenced in her impressive legal career as the chairperson for the Board of Directors for Justice 360, vice chair of the Amicus Committee for the Fourth Circuit for the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, and as a member of the Board of Directors for the South Carolina chapter of the Federal Bar Association.
Wow.
Attorney Franklin Best, I thought I was busy. And people say that I am, but I will not let them say that anymore. I'm going to bring out your resume and tell them there's a lady who's doing 10 times more than I'm doing and having a major impact on the lives of others. So we welcome you. We thank you for speaking to us this evening. This is extremely important work, and we are so grateful that you answered the call to take on this work.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I mean, I've had an opportunity to kind of look into your, your organization, and I just think it's really great work that you're doing, and just, incredibly important to raise awareness, and to, bring hope and ideas in this really kind of troubled area. So, it's great to meet you and to make these connections. So I appreciate the opportunity.
We're glad that you're here. Absolutely.
Well, Attorney Franklin, we're going to kind of get right to it. When Anala shared with me how emotional she became after reading the account of your book when you were a new lawyer in South Carolina, and you were expected to have one of your clients plead guilty. I couldn't wait to have you join us to share your story and your book, Reversing Your Criminal Conviction. But the compassion and empathy expressed through the work in your book, your words, the cover of your book, I mean, they're not really the emotions that we see typically demonstrated by an attorney. And I'm going to say that one more time. We're not accustomed to seeing attorneys who put their emotions and their hearts right out there. Now, we're going to return after a short commercial break when Attorney Franklin Best will share information on reversing your criminal conviction. So stay tuned.
I am a black male who is now freed from the captivity of prison, and Women Woke Within supported my efforts to become a free man. I contacted so many organizations, but Women Woke Within is the only one that helped me. I support their work. If you are unjustly sentenced to prison or convicted of any crime, reach out to Women Woke Within. They will most definitely fight for your freedom. Just look at me now. Now, I can live my life.
Are you facing indictment or have you been sentenced unjustly? If so, contact Women Woke Within today. We work to ensure justice and obtain your freedom.
Welcome back. Let's talk about it. Today, our guest speaker, attorney Elizabeth Franklin Best, will share details from her published book, Reversing Your Criminal Conviction. So let's get started. Attorney Franklin Best, please briefly share your experience with your first case with our entire audience.
Yeah, so I write about this in the book, because, I've been in the criminal justice space now for about 20 years, a little over 20 years. And so, I have thoughts, and those thoughts have kind of evolved over the course of those years. And, when I was, so first of all, I guess I'll sort of recount the story. I mean, I had graduated from law school. I had practiced criminal defense work up in New York for about a year, but I came back to South Carolina because I wanted to be home. I got a job as a public defender, which I really wanted to do. I mean, that's why I came back to South Carolina. I left it for about a decade because I just thought it was a really deeply kind of troubled area. But I came back because I really just wanted to kind of jump into the fight and, kind of do sort of civil rights adjacent work. And I thought that doing public defense would be a great place to do this. So, I was pretty smart, I thought I was. I mean, I could get licensed in a bar, in New York and also South Carolina. And, I was educated. And so I just kind of figured, I can do this. So it was like the first day of my practice, I'd just gotten licensed. And, I took over the caseload of an attorney who had recently left the office. And so, they handed me like 250 cases and said, okay, have at it. Right. I mean, I just had never, and these are felony cases, right? I mean, these weren't, illegal possession of beer, this is, like drug cases. And so I had this one kid and he had like, 3 different sets of charges, right? I mean, he would get arrested and then get out on bond, pick up more charges. So he was looking, I mean, because of the recidivist statute, I mean, he was looking at a potential life sentence, right?
Wow.
And so the prosecutor in that case, who, I still remember this, was like, he's got to plead. He's got to take this 12-year offer. Otherwise, I'm going to, start calling these cases and I'm going to, seek a life sentence for him. And South Carolina is one of the only states where the solicitors actually controlled the docket system. So this was like no idle threat. I mean, he could have, just called the case. And if he secured those convictions, and I didn't know anything about that case, I didn't know how strong these cases were, he could get a life sentence. So I was terrified. I mean, when I was up in New York, I think the longest I ever had somebody serve a sentence for was like 90 days, so now I'm supposed to like get this kid to like plead to 12 years. And so, I'm down in holding and I'm explaining to him, this is kind of what they say they're going to do. What are we going to do? Are you going to plead? And, I don't recall much about that conversation. I don't recall strong arming him or kind of forcing him into this. Although the situation itself, I think, would have been inherently coercive, right? I mean, I was the one who kind of like knew what he should do. And so I'm in there and I'm clearly concerned about what could happen to him. And so I'm sure I did put more pressure on him than I should have. What I should have done really was take it up with the judge and say, this is fundamentally unfair. I need time with this case. I haven't had an opportunity to investigate a single thing. I haven't seen all the discovery. I haven't interviewed any witnesses. I know nothing about my client's family. I mean, I should have really just kind of stepped up, but I didn't. And, I never really kind of thought of myself as somebody who was sort of scared. I think if you had asked me, are you somebody who's sort of scared of, stepping up and being kind of aggressive, I never saw myself like that. So he took the plea and he got 12 years and I felt like shit. I mean, I felt really terrible. And I just, I still think about it because I think kind of what happened in that moment is something that I see a lot in the system as a whole. I mean, you can be, a smart person, you can be accomplished, you can have the best intentions, you can really care, you can, be all of these things and still screw up someone's case. And then they're the ones who are, left with just sort of the devastating consequences of this. And so I think we're used to thinking in terms of, these are the good people, these are the bad people, but it's just really a lot more complicated than that. I mean, what happened there is that, it was the system that was, putting pressure, I guess, on this prosecutor to get this case done. I mean, he had picked up 3 sets of charges. I mean, this was obviously not a brand new case. So he had some pressure to get this done. I had pressure, and this kid now had pressure. And it's like, why aren't we spending more time kind of talking about like what the right resolution is here instead of just everybody, in just a state of it because everyone's under all this pressure. And so it's really sort of changed my thinking about it. I mean, I just think that I just think it's much more complicated than just the good people and the bad people. It's the system itself that I think is fundamentally inhuman, and really does not do what it is designed to do.
That's right. And and all that information, if I must say, Attorney Franklin Best, came out in your book. It was, I mean, I was almost to tears just reading just the introduction and how all this happened with you and how you, and because of how you what happened at that time, you wrote a book that really, if people would read it, God, if they would read your book, it would help them in their case. It really, really would. So we
I appreciate that. I mean, that, what I did was, at a certain point, you have these same conversations with people and people just don't know what the system is like. I mean, until you were like in it, you really have no realistic understanding of how it operates. We watch Law and Order on television, right? I mean, everyone thinks they have it all figured out.
Yeah.
But until you are just proximate to it and all of, the trauma in the system, I mean, you just don't know what you don't know. And so this was sort of, I wanted something that I could give to somebody and say, okay, you need to start thinking really deeply about the situation that you find yourself in. And you're going to need to educate yourself and you're going to need to advocate for yourself. And it's good if you can trust people, but at the end of the day, what happens here, you're going to have to take ownership of it. And so I just wanted people to at least to start having, the vocabulary and understanding it. I mean, it's surprising to me now. I'll get a phone call from somebody and they're like, hey, I just got convicted. Well, usually it's a loved person, a loved one who calls.
Right.
My son just got convicted. My husband just got convicted. What do we do now? Like they literally have no idea what the next step is. And I'm like, well, we got to get that notice of appeal filed. and then here's what you get. Then you got your appeal, then you got your post-conviction, and then you've got your federal habeas. And, there aren't any like Law and Order episodes on that kind of post-conviction piece.
That's right. That's exactly.
And so people just needed to kind of be knowledgeable about, what now.
If they read your book, they're really going to get a lot of knowledge. And as a matter of fact, Cassandra Jones with the Women Woke Within, she's a paralegal, and she tells us all the time that people need to fight for themselves, and you can't just trust what someone tells you. So
It's absolutely right. I mean, it's absolutely right. And I mean, it's too bad that it's like that. You've got a lot of really great lawyers who are out there, but you got a lot of not great ones.
yes,
and even the good ones can screw up. I mean, that's kind of the thing. I mean, and it's one thing that I know that my clients tend to appreciate about me is, I mean, I really spend a lot of time kind of listening to like what they think the problems in their case are. I'm not one of the lawyers who's like, well, I just know more than you. I mean, at the end of the day, I do know more about the legal claims, but they know their cases to an extent that I never can because they've lived through it.
you listened. That's the difference.
And so they're going to tell me something and they may not even appreciate like how important that piece of, information is, but now maybe I know about another witness or something. So I want to know what they know. And then because no one knows it better than they do, frankly. And it's just important. It can be, it can be something that completely changes the case.
Attorney Franklin Best, when I was reading your book, I walked away with a couple of things. One thing is, this book is a wonderful blend of heart and head. Your heart pours out in each page, but you leave your readers with the exact knowledge that they need to get a job done. That's very difficult to do, especially when you're writing a book, because a lot of writers, that emotion doesn't come through, but yours leaps off the page. And we can see it now, even as you're responding and talking to us. It's a passion that you feel deeply within, isn't it?
I mean, honestly, I think it's kind of trauma. I mean, it's you live in this space and, you see what you see. And once you see it, you can't really look away, and so I can't, I still fail by my own standards, right? I mean, you can't be 100% heart every single day, but I've got enough of it that I feel like I've done a lot of good work. But, not in every case. I mean, I do the very best I can, and I do everything I can to kind of make it better for everyone. But, it's difficult to to every single day kind of walk into the drama and the trauma that you see. I mean, I was thinking about this morning because I knew I was going to be talking with you women this afternoon. My first trial, maybe it was my second trial. It was sort of that same period, and I still remember the client's name. His name was Curtino Weathersby. And he was 22 years old. And so he was tried for an armed robbery. He lived in a community that was really very sort of challenging community. And he is accused of having taken a gun and stolen money from a drug dealer. That drug dealer tried to kill him. But this is what happened. And so we took his case to trial. He got convicted, and, without a blink, without any hesitation, right? This judge gave him like 25 years. Like, why? He's this 22-year-old kid. I mean, sure, that was, not a great thing to do. But, when you give people these sentences, right? I mean, that's kind of a piece that I feel like we don't talk about nearly enough. I mean, we've got wrongful convictions, but a bigger problem are wrongful sentences.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
And we don't talk about it. even though 98% of cases, resolve by way of guilty pleas.
That's right.
Mhm.
They don't talk about it. So, those are the kinds of things that I see, just this, people's lives are just thrown away and they're just warehoused, and nobody stops to say, what are we doing here?
But that's why we're here. That's why we exist, because we are talking about it. We're talking about those sentences where people are getting 25 and 30 years for aggravated assault.
I mean, I just
You
don't.
know, you know,
I can't
without a
tell.
deadly weapon. I mean, we're talking about those things, and we're looking at the judges that actually hand out a sentence without blinking an eye. We're
Without
talking about those
blinking.
things. We're bringing those things up. But more importantly, what we're finding is that once they get entangled in the system, is very difficult. So one of the things that we're doing is also working on the front end, because there are cases where it may be, perhaps they wouldn't have gotten so much time. What a person thinks is that because their lawyer says, oh, well, we take a plea, you get 5 years or 10 years, you're out. Well, the judge doesn't necessarily give them that in the state of Georgia. They can change their mind and get up and say, oh no, we're going to give you 25 years. And you think you're getting a plea for 5 years. So
Yeah.
Vicki, I'm so sorry. I want you to go on with your questions. I know you had more, but I'm just
It's easy to get worked up. I mean,
Yeah,
It really
easy
is.
to, like,
It really is. And
get
I kind of
really-
wanted to leverage what both of you are talking about in my next question. You say in the book, it's not hard to understand why encountering the criminal justice system can be devastating emotionally and psychologically. And then you alert your readers that the system is designed to make you feel that way. I'm telling you that sentence stuck with me, and it is traumatizing. And you go back to your 22-year-old, if that's his first time ever being in prison, if the system is designed to keep him there, can you just kind of touch on that for a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, and this is another thing this is kind of one of those things I've thought about over the years. And when we look back, right, I mean, 40 years ago, like around the time that, Reagan kind of started this war on drugs, we had roughly 300,000 people in our prison system. The last time I looked, which I guess was maybe last year, I think that number was like 2.5 million. I mean, the growth of incarceration, mass incarceration over the last 40 years is astounding. And you have to wonder, what's it going to be like in another 40 years?
That's right.
I mean, who else are you going to put in there?
That's right.
And, I don't know if you've read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow.
Mm.
Yes.
It is extraordinary. And I read that book, I think when it first came out, like in 2008. And I reread it this past summer. And I mean, it really struck me then, and it continues to strike me now. I mean, she is just completely right.
That's right.
And it's the system, right? I mean, the system it's designed to just warehouse people without giving them an opportunity for redemption, rehabilitation. I mean, the person who goes to prison at age 22 is very different from a 27-year-old.
That's right.
I mean, 5 years is a very significant sentence in which I think you would expect to see very significant changes in somebody.
That's
So
right.
why are we, why am I talking to a 40-year-old man who's been incarcerated since he was 20? Like this, what are we doing? I mean, what we're doing is we're inflicting damage on the community from which that person came.
That's exactly right.
I mean, that's really what we've done. But here's the thing, right? I mean, how do you change it? Right? I mean, so what do you do? How do you get some movement here. The way that the system is now, we are a system of plea deals.
Mm.
I mean, roughly 98% of these cases are, resolved by plea deals. If only 10% of the people who are charged with crimes decided to exercise their right to a trial, the system would utterly collapse.
Yes.
It can't handle it. It
That's
doesn't have the money. It doesn't have the personnel. You know, when you think about kind of deep structural change, I kind of wonder, what would that look like?
And I think that
People,
so
started.
front end of this stuff, we can make that happen because most people take a plea because they are terrified.
They're
They don't
terrible.
know. Somebody tells you, oh, if you don't take this plea, you're going to get 40 years of life. What are you going to do? You're going to take the plea. So I think if people knew what to do and they had people helping them through the process, using your book and your pattern and all that, and whatever else you can use, I think that you would see less pleas. I like that. I like that point.
I mean, it's dangerous, right? I mean, I've had 2 women clients who, I mean, not surprising to me, right? That they were women. They, were offered plea deals, but they weren't guilty. And when you're not guilty of something, you expect the system to work. And so you go to trial.
That's right.
And both of them did. And they both got convicted anyway. And they both got 30-year sentences, one for an accessory to murder charge and the other for drugs that were in her boyfriend's duffel bag.
Wow.
And my client who had, in the murder case, I mean, she was offered 5 years. She turned it down. Now she's doing 30.
Wow.
So all this is to say, I mean, yes, everyone should be going to trial. I mean, I think that would really kind of change what all this looks like. But at the same time, there's some people who just need to take a plea to save their own skin.
That's right.
And I hate that. I mean, that's not what I think any of us think of as justice. I mean, what should have happened is that charge should have been dropped. I mean, the prosecutor should have known that, the drugs were in the boyfriend's duffel bag, or, the girl didn't know that her boyfriend was going to shoot, the victim. Somebody should have dropped those charges. But one of the real problems we have is that no politician, loses an election for being too hard on crime.
That's right.
But they will always lose it if they are, if their opponent calls them too soft on crime.
That's right.
So there are no political incentives for any of this to change. Like, you can't just elect the right politician and then everything's going to get better. I mean, I really think that this is the kind of issue, because it's ahistorical, right? I mean, we've never seen anything like what this looks like other than here in America over the last 40 years. Okay, well, maybe China, maybe Russia, but I mean, that's a completely different sort of,
But
stuff.
one of the things is that people continue to elect the same judge. They continue, and DAs are elected. They continue to, because most people don't look at that DA or they don't look at that judge and know what their records are. I mean, I'm what we're trying to tell people, why continue to elect someone who doesn't, who's they just give you the max every time, and who wants you to accept a plea. So most people don't even think, they think about the presidential election, Senate, and maybe Congress, but they don't think about their own backyard of who they're electing into office. And that is one of the things that I believe is really a challenge.
Well, there's also, I mean, a lot of people who just don't understand how broken the system is. So they're like, oh, that guy's tough on crime. He keeps my community safe. Look, I want somebody to keep my community safe.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So I'd be hard pressed to say, I'm going to vote for the one who's like, no one's going to go to prison on my watch. I mean, I get it.
I think some people need to be somewhere. I mean, some people need to, they need to be taken away from society. There are some. I mean, but
There are some.
yeah, I don't advocate that.
Nothing like what's happening. I mean, I can tell you, we made a decision in this country that we were going to treat drugs like a criminal problem and not a healthcare problem. Okay, so that was a decision we made. And the consequences of that is that, I mean, that's who's in the prisons. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, you got the violent guys. I mean, they're there. That's in my mind, it's kind of a separate issue. But you got a whole bunch of drug addicts.
Right. That's exactly right.
I want to go back to, and it was a very good example. The lady who didn't take the 5-year plea deal, and now she's serving 30 years. In chapter 2, you gave us some questions that a person who's been wrongfully convicted should ask themselves. And then you say challenge your conviction each step of the way. Can you explain to our audience why developing this list of questions is so important? And also those you should ask of an attorney in particular.
I mean, so all of this, you know, all of this is to say, I just think that people got to get really deep and real with where they're at. One thing I've seen sort of throughout, again, my career is that when people are charged with crimes, I mean, oftentimes there is this denial that kind of sets in. I mean, it's so psychologically painful for them and for their families that it's easier just to not talk about it. It's easier not to think about it. But that kind of aversion, I think, is why some people almost like sleepwalk their way into these convictions. Oh, my lawyer's telling me to do this. It's almost like learned helplessness, right? I mean, they just do what their lawyer tells them, and they're assuming that somebody else is making the hard decisions for them. And I think that's a completely natural and normal psychological phenomenon, to try to avoid that pain. But in order to mount the kind of challenge that I think you need to, and when you're up against, the enormous power of the state and the government, you got to work through that wall. You got to say, all right, I'm in some real trouble here. I got to think about how I'm going to deal with this. How did I get here? And what can I do to kind of really sort of move this forward and in a way that, I can protect myself, mitigate, my sentence. A lot of people, again, like maybe they're guilty, but they're getting these really long sentences. So, I mean, if you're getting picked up on some sort of a drug charge, right? Maybe what you need to be doing is getting yourself into some kind of a treatment program so that when you're getting sentenced at some point, you got something to say. Or maybe you've got a lawyer who is working with a mitigation specialist, somebody who can really unpack your story in such a way that the court is going to be receptive to you. I mean, we don't spend nearly enough time talking about sentencing in America, but sentencing is just critical. And there are things that I think people can do on the front end of their cases that can really assist them on that piece. I mean, again, it's oftentimes we're talking about the wrongful convictions. That's a huge problem, but it's the sentencing piece that also, I think, just deserves so much attention. So I think I may have forgotten the second part of your question. was that kind of
That did answer. The second part was what the questions that one should ask of an attorney.
So that's a great question. I really think it's just about finding somebody you really like and you can talk to and you can really sort of work with. I mean, you got to find somebody who sort of shares your energy. Like, I'm a big fan of, seeing some like young lawyers who really just want to go and like pick a fight in a courtroom. Like sometimes those can just be like the very best. They're not the ones who were charging $50,000, right? I mean, they're They're the ones who are just like scrappy and they want to pick a fight. And some, you know, I've seen some of those be like the most successful lawyers, the ones who are just not afraid to really take it to the government or the state. So, you know, you don't need the most expensive guy. You don't need necessarily the most, you know, the one who's been in business for 30 years. I mean, I think a lot of the really older ones, frankly, are just like done with it and you know, aren't that touched by it anymore. I mean, so get yourself a young, scrappy lawyer. I mean, I just think that that's probably going to be your best.
And you know what, you're so right about that. I remember, and one of the reasons that I'm into helping and wanting to do the work that we do is because I was incarcerated. I was in prison, or I was sentenced to for 20 to do 20 years, but I fought my case. It was a nonviolent case, you know, but the area that I was in, even the attorney, my attorney said, well, you know, these are you know, rednecks, they're gonna da da da. I mean, and he got upset because I wouldn't take a plea. He got up, the judge did, and told me, because you won't take a plea, this is what we're gonna do. And the DA had told me, well, if you don't take this plea, this is gonna happen. And everything that he said happened. But I wanted to go back on something you said, and that's just, you know, you said it so well, because I was feeling all the things you just expressed in words. And that was, I didn't really tell my family. I didn't really tell them to come to court, because I thought I'm innocent, so I'm going to be treated fairly. I hired a lawyer, and I thought, well, I don't need to really call the lawyer. He's working for me. I've sent him a whole bunch of stuff, and so he's just doing the job. He's going to do. So 6 months he didn't call me. 6 months I didn't call him, because I'm thinking, you know, everything is great until I was indicted, and until all this. I mean, until had been indicted, until it just went crazy. And I'm standing there, and the judge hits the gavel and tells me 20, and I'm thinking to myself, how did this happen? Well, I'm gonna tell you how it happened. Exactly what you said. I did not get into the ring and fight for myself. I thought someone else was going to do it for me. And that is why I have so much passion for what we're doing right now, because if you don't fight for yourself, you don't learn knowledge. And that's why when I found your book, I bought it, because I wanted to learn about this, because it shouldn't happen to people. You shouldn't have to go through that.
No, absolutely. Well, can I ask? I mean, so how did you win on appeal? How did you?
Yes, well, what I did is you know, in Georgia, you get to go to the parole board. So yes,
Okay.
I appealed. I won the habeas. So yes, that's exactly what I did. And thank goodness, I have a Cassandra Jones, so it's the paralegal. She's kept telling me, you need to do this and you need to do that. I'm thinking, oh well, you know, she said no. So one weekend, she just made me. She made me do what I needed to do, and that's what happened. Yeah, they and then come to find out with the judge, because I had I had 3 lawyers, well, 2 lawyers. The first lawyer, second lawyer, and what I found out is, even when I went back to the court the first time, the judge denied it. He didn't even have a right to deny my appeal. He wasn't even supposed to be heard by him. The lawyer that I had, after he got my money, the second lawyer was paid, he went on a trip somewhere and didn't come back to after 30 days, 45 days. And, you know, so that was a mess. So anyway, the habeas judge ruled in my favor because of that, because of those things. So yeah, it was pretty bad what they did. But if I had not filed the habeas, guess what? I would have lost. I would have lost everything. I would have still, you know, everything would have been down the drain, because after the 4 years, it's over. And they don't care. That's when my grandmother used to say, they lock you up and throw away the key. If you don't exercise your rights, they do throw away the key.
They do. I mean, that's exactly right. And, you know, one of the things I talk about in the book is, I mean, how important it is to kind of fight the case at the earliest times. I mean, there's like this fiction in the system, like the older the conviction is, you know, the more right it must be, because otherwise somebody would have let this person out earlier. You know, I mean, it's kind of like, you just gotta, it's hard to get a court to look at a case that's like 20 years old.
That's exactly right. We're dealing with that right now with some cases that we're
Yeah.
working on, right, Ms. Butler?
Yeah, you know, I'm sitting here on the edge of my seat right now with everything that's being said, because then when I look at, even with my own situation going through, this is why the work Women Woke Within is so, so important. Because especially, and not to say that men don't go through, their own sets of traumas and things that are hindering them for fighting for themselves. But I know I can speak for myself. The only thing that I was thinking about is I cannot be away from my children.
Yeah.
That was all. I didn't have literally having panic attacks thinking about being away from my children. I didn't have the strength to fight for myself, nor did I have the knowledge, So that's why this work with Women Woke Within, because we have to be that voice and that come in with that clear mind to be able to say, okay, let's untangle this big mess. What do we have? What direction do we want to go? How do we want to support the lawyers? Things like that. Because literally, when you're talking about trauma, and I've heard that word come up, so much as the system, quote unquote, is trying to, like you said, separate the good from the bad. What they're essentially doing is traumatizing everyone that's involved, that's attached to each one of these cases. That's not just family members, but you have the police officers that's traumatized. You have lawyers that's traumatized. You have some judges that's traumatized. Some of them, yes, you do have some people that go home and like whatever, just do the best you can and not lose sleep over it. But then you have others like yourself that they go to sleep with these things. They know what, they're thinking about. This is somebody's life. It all boils down to the value of a life. And what these systems are doing is creating a toxic society overall. They're punishing you for doing things that, quote unquote, that they're saying is bad, but they're not focusing on the resolve. How do we stop? What measures do we need to put in place in society, resources, things like that? How do we be a better neighbor to each other? Just some simple things that we're missing, and therefore we're punishing. I say this all the time, the things that we're seeing in society, we all need to look in the mirror and say, are we doing our best to be the best person we can be towards others? Because all it is doing is re-traumatizing over and over and over in different ways. And then you're dealing with people that have complex trauma. And that is what we're not looking at.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think there's whole communities, that experience complex trauma, and I mean, you're right. I mean, we just don't, we're not even thinking in those terms, right? I mean, nobody wants to have those conversations, because if you do, then you have to start talking about, well, maybe we shouldn't be putting people in prison for as long as we are. And that's when the politicians lose their next elections.
That's right. That's exactly right.
It's just so hard to have the conversations, which is why I think, ultimately, I think it's got to be something kind of grassroots. I don't put much hope in politicians to, sort of fix all this.
Attorney Franklin Best, you share a wealth of information on direct appeal, and I know we're running out of time, but can you just talk with us a little about why filing a direct appeal is so important?
So I love direct appeals. I think they're critically important. Even though in a direct appeal, you're like limited to what's in the record. Okay. Like you can't bring in new evidence or anything like that. And that's a real bummer for a lot of people. They're like, well, but no one ever heard this other part of the story. You can still do a lot of really important stuff with the direct appeal though. And part of it is beginning to reframe the case. All right. There's only one time in your journey that somebody is going to read that transcript, and it's going to be your appellate attorney as they're beginning to kind of illustrate by showing, some of the weaknesses in the state's case. I feel like I'm not really expressing this very well, but it's an important time to kind of reframe the case. And if you lose that direct appeal and you go into like your post-conviction and your federal habeas, you know, the courts there are going to read that appeal. You know, they're going to read your brief. And so it's important to kind of think about, you know, making sure that you're embedding certain themes in the case, right, at the earliest point that you can. I mean, one thing that, you know, people are looking at, the courts are looking at later on is really sort of like the internal consistency of what you're saying. So, you know, if it's an alibi case, right, if you weren't there, then, you know, in the direct appeal, you want to kind of highlight who are the witnesses who were there, you know, and who said what, and what kind of beefs were there between these people that this, you know, innocent person is now getting dragged into it. I mean, you want to start kind of planting those seeds, because later when you're in post-conviction and you bring your alibi witnesses into the courtroom to testify, it's consistent with what's here, you know, and it begins to kind of put together a narrative of injustice that, you know, I think the courts will respond to. I mean, at the end of the day, like, I think the courts, you know, the appellate courts, I don't say this about the lower courts, but I think the appellate courts really do want to kind of get it right. I don't think they want innocent people in prison, but there's such shoddy work oftentimes that the story is not well presented to them. So, you know, you got to think in terms of like narrative structure and sort of literary, you know, sort of principles, so that that story makes it to where it needs to go. And then, you know, then you ask the court to do something well. You know, we think of these pieces as being, you know, kind of scattered, like, oh, here's my trial, here's my appeal, here's my post-conviction, here's my federal habeas. But at the end of the day, it's the same challenge to the government's case, right? And so we need to think more cohesively about what's happened here, a little more bird's eye kind of view of it. And then, you know, bring, you know, let's get the investigators to do what they need to do. Let's bring in the experts to do what they need to do. You know, let's bring the challenges that really advance that narrative. Because once you have, you know, someone saying, well, I wasn't there, but if I did, it was an accident, then the court sees that you don't have anything. It's easy to discount that defendant. It makes it very easy for them to say, you know what, nothing here, let's move along. And you know, and people don't do it, you know, they're doing it out of the best intentions, right? I mean, I see these kind of pro se pleadings where, you know, somebody's got this really great, you know, jailhouse lawyer, and then they file this 75-page, you know, something with the Supreme Court, and the court's never going to read that. You know, they're doing their very best to kind of advocate for themselves, but that's just not how, I mean, fundamentally, that's just not how the court works. You know, an ideal brief is probably like 10 pages, right? But it just says all the right things. And it just, you know, gives a picture of the injustice so that somebody can just sort of see where everything broke down. And it's a lot easier to grant relief on that kind of a record. So that was really kind of another reason why this book came into being. I mean, I think I say this in the book. I mean, I've seen so many cases just sort of fall apart because the necessary record wasn't there for the court to do what the defendant wants them to do. You know, so you got to think about making sure your evidence is in that record so that a court can hang its hat on it.
I love that part. When I read that in your book about that is one of the most important things that you need to do is that direct appeal. I'm thinking, wow, most people, they get turned down there is because they didn't put the right things in. They're trying to introduce something new and all this stuff. So I really love that.
Yeah,
sorry.
I have a question, Ms. Beth. So I know a lot of times when we're fighting our cases, we are constantly looking at the judges and the DA and the lawyer. And a lot of times the investigator on that case from the county level is almost skipped over and not looked at.
Mhm.
How can, when, especially dealing with post-conviction, what is your opinion or suggestion of getting down to the root where from the time of the arrest to where the investigators got involved? And so many things went wrong. How do you work from there? What's your best advice? How do you work from there to defend yourself from that point?
So I'm a big believer in getting your own investigator. I mean, I think, and I just want to make sure I'm sort of understanding this. I mean, whenever like a lawyer says, oh, our defense at trial was, reasonable guilt or reasonable doubt, I know that person never had a defense.
Mm.
Like if you were charged with something, you need a defense. You need to figure out what it is, right? I wasn't there. I was there, but it was an accident, whatever it is. I had permission to be in the house, and then you need to build your case. You need to get your own witnesses into the courtroom. You need to get, an investigator to go and find out, to interview your witnesses. I mean, sometimes you just have to bring it to the state, right? I mean, I see a lot of lawyers who are like, well, here's the discovery and this is what they're going to bring and this is what they're going to do and this is what they're going to do. Okay, that's half the case. That's not the whole case.
Right.
And when I was working at the public defender's office in Richland County, I mean, one of the things I really loved about it is that, Fridays we were out there doing crime scene investigations and we were talking to people and we were conducting investigation because that's what you have to do. But there are a lot of lawyers out there who just think, well, we're just going to challenge what the state has to say.
Sit in the office.
That's not the way to challenge a conviction.
Mm.
Just isn't. But, a lot of people, they don't have the money, right?
Right.
I mean,
That part.
you've got the public defender, and if you don't have the money and the public defender is the best you can do. That's why I think organizations like what you're talking about are so important, right? I mean, do some fundraising, get some money together so that maybe you can, hire some investigators for some of these people who really need it, because that's where a lot of that's where a lot of these cases are made.
And almost you need to investigate the investigator who investigated the case. You have your investigator, from what I'm understanding from you, you have your investigator, you bring your own in, and now they investigate what the investigator said.
That's it. I mean, bring your own case.
Yes.
I mean, and make it rough for them. I mean, this is kind of going back to this idea of, everyone needs to be going to trial. Well, they need to be, because they need to be like actually subjecting the state's case to adversarial testing. I mean, you got to bring it.
I love it. Bring it, bring it. I love that.
You got to bring it. And they're not used to it.
Mhm. Mhm.
They're used to talking to their investigators, and I mean, prosecutors are all like, chummy with one another, and they feel like they've got God on their side, and they just sort of walk into courtrooms with an extraordinary amount of arrogance.
Yeah.
But if you've got your own case, I mean, you don't have to turn over a lot of stuff to them, right? I mean, you get your own case.
Wow.
Maybe you have to turn something over, unless it's like a report. You don't need to. They don't need to know what your witnesses are going to say. Bring your own case.
Bring your own case. Wow. Vicki.
That is profound. And it's another one of those nuggets I will carry with me, in addition to how the system is designed to be against you and to traumatize you. Attorney Franklin Best, are there any final words you would like to share with us today?
Yeah, I mean, I just, I know sometimes when I'm having these conversations, I feel like I'm sounding particularly negative. I kind of am, right? I mean, I think I'm sort of a realist, but at the same time, I mean, there's a lot of reason for hope. I mean, there's a lot that people can do to work through this system. you know, I just think that it requires open eyes and open minds and just a willingness to really get scrappy and fight. I think the system and dehumanizing people and traumatizing them, I mean, it gets people into this, you know, scarcity mode. I mean, people are frightened. You get it. I mean, you know, the stakes could not be higher. But, you know, a good fight is worth it, and people win. I mean, they really do. You know, people win. And I think I wrote about Paris Avery, and she was, you know, one of the cases I had on direct appeal, and you know, she had a 35-year sentence for homicide by child abuse, and it took 7 years, but we got her home. You know, we got her home, and and there's just nothing like it. I remember she had this vision book, right? So when she was in prison, she had this book when she would take, you know, pictures out of magazines, and she would write about like what her future husband would be like. And, you know, she just had in her mind like this vision of what her life was going to be. And I just still sort of think to myself, I mean, she just like mentally transported herself out of there, you know.
I talk about
And
that
it
all the
just,
time.
you know, and it just was amazing. So, but she had, I mean, she always had hope,
Right.
you know, so I had to kind of like fight through my own trauma of, oh my God, what happens if she, you know, if we lose here? But she always knew she was going to get out.
So really, what you're saying is you fight and you think positive. I mean, you see yourself winning, but you don't just sit there and see yourself
You
winning.
got to get your brain. I
That's it.
mean, you know, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about manifesting or
Oh,
anything,
I do that. That's me.
but there is, I think, I mean, there's a difference between the people who you know are going to be staying in prison and the ones who aren't.
That's exactly right. They make
And
they make it home.
it's a way of thinking about it. It's a way of getting deep with it. It's a way of getting strategic and not letting the junk hold you down.
Exactly right.
So,
I'm gonna say one more thing just before I know Vicky's with our time is out. But one of the things that I did is everybody would ask me, "Well, how much time you have?" I said, "Oh, I'll be going home soon." And you know how people do; they get your number and then they go look you up and they go, "Oh, no, she's not going home." But you know what? I said, no, I'm going to be going home soon. I kept that. I did the vision board. I did all the things you're talking about.
wow. Okay.
When I would go to the cafeteria, to the little, they don't call it cafeteria, whatever it was, to go eat, I would imagine that I'm going to meet with friends to have lunch. And I imagine that the fence that was there to keep people out from trying to get in to see me. So I use my imagination a lot, and you have to do that. You have to, you rewrite the narrative in your own mind. And that's one of the things I did. But
Amazing. I'm so interested to hear you say that, because I mean that was what Paris did,
I
and
did that. I did exactly that, but I still fought. So you don't just think you're gonna get out. You gotta do the work too. So, but anyway, I hate that. I love this conversation. Go ahead, Vicki.
Attorney Franklin Best, I think we could spend another 2 hours with you, and we probably still would want to let you go. We appreciate the time that you have taken to spend with us, to enlighten us, to inform us. And you see the passion on this panel. We see the passion in you. If we could bottle this passion, it would do such wonders. But we can take the knowledge that you have given to us through your book, Reversing Your Criminal Conviction, and we can take the hearts and the spirit that indwells each of us, and we can covenant to make a difference, even if it's just with one person. Because I think that's how you started. Just one person, make a difference in one person's life, then you'll get opportunities to reach more and more people, which is the mission of Women Woke Within. So we say thank you to you. Let me encourage you, members of the audience, you have to get this book if you have been victimized by the system. If you know someone or have a family member who has been part of this prison industrial complex, this is a roadmap to freedom. So please let me impress upon you, you can get this book through Amazon, and because we only scratched the surface tonight. So we thank you again, Attorney Franklin Best. We also thank our panelists who've been with us, and we thank the thousands of our national and international audience members who always support the Shift Network. Now, for more information regarding the work of Women Woke Within, go to www.womenwokewithin.com. And remember, together we are stronger. I am Vicki Bone, your host. Until we meet again.